Donald Trump is currently saying that Bitcoin will rise to 500,000 US dollars and reach a market capitalization of 10 trillion. He also says that we need to take the lead here against China, and that now is the time to go all in on Bitcoin. He says he loves Bitcoin. We look at the statements, but we also have a massive pivot, a huge turnaround. Dave Ramsey, who is widely known as a Bitcoin critic, is now opening up to Bitcoin and suddenly says, hey, Bitcoin here, everything cool, and so on. We'll also take a look at why more and more people are starting to waver and are completely changing their opinions by 180 degrees. Today, we're also going to take a little city tour here in San Salvador. Smash that like button down below if you're ready to pump up the Bitcoin price. Right now, things are looking kind of weird. There are a ton of bullish things happening. I keep saying massive all the time today for some reason. There are a ton of bullish things happening. But honestly, the Bitcoin price could be way higher considering how massive the news has been. Every day I get messages like, hey Mark, shouldn't the price be way higher? Is the price being suppressed? And so on. Yeah, that could be the case. But now we also have all these players, like Donald Trump, for example, who is now saying that the markets should be pumped up or that the financial markets should rise, and so on. We've often seen it happen that big players, for example, somehow push prices down, and then we hear strange statements, like from Donald Trump, where he says, yeah, he doesn't care about the stock markets. And then, once their bags are fully loaded, they just switch modes and flip to, well, pump mode. We've seen that happen plenty of times in financial history. It could be that we're right on the verge of such a moment. There have always been speculations, like BlackRock working together with Coinbase and so on. But a lot of that is partly just conspiracy theories. I don't necessarily want to say that the price is actively being manipulated or anything like that. In any case, let's take a look at Donald Trump's latest statements. First, he says here that we will be leading in crypto. He was referring to China as well. He always sees China as a major, not exactly an enemy, but at least a competitor, right? And he's said that several times now. This isn't the first time he said we need to be ahead of China, because he simply understands the importance. Because he gets that, okay, there's a kind of space race going on here. You definitely have to be in from the very beginning. Honestly, I don't even know exactly where he said that. Feel free to let me know in the comments below where exactly he said that. I'm out and about right now, just saw all the news updates. All over X, the feeds are full of these reports. Yeah, for example, Donald Trump is now saying that he likes Bitcoin and crypto, and I think it's an asset class worth over $10 trillion. So, there are sources, Cointelegraph. I don't know if he gave a speech somewhere. In any case, he says here, hey guys, Bitcoin could definitely rise to $10 trillion. He sees the potential here. And of course, that would mean, if the current price of Bitcoin is around 100,000, then we'd still have almost a 5-fold increase to reach a 10 trillion asset, since we're currently at about 2 trillion. That means we'd have a Bitcoin price, not exactly, roughly, at 500,000 US dollars. That's the kind of potential Donald Trump sees here. And that's pretty massive, of course. I mean, he didn't say 500,000 exactly. That was basically my calculation. Because you can basically derive the 500,000 from the 10 trillion, right? But now, as it looks, we really have the incentives on our side. Donald Trump is advocating for Bitcoin. The other big players are all invested in Bitcoin. And that's the right move. For example, we have major people invested in Bitcoin, then they all have the incentive to drive Bitcoin's price up. I've said that many times before. And that's why it makes sense, just like I said at the beginning. At first, everything was downplayed a bit. People filled up their bags. And now they're changing their tune. Suddenly, Bitcoin is amazing. 500,000. The markets are going to go up. And so on. That means we're hearing different statements now than we did 2 or 3 months ago, right? And that could already indicate that, at least from the Trump administration, there's an attempt to really pump up the price of Bitcoin. Now, but like I said, there's a bit of conspiracy in there, a bit of speculation. I don't know for sure, 100%. Probably nobody knows for sure except Donald Trump himself. But now let's take a look at the second very interesting thing that happened here. Because Dave Ramsey is a major financial influencer, millions of followers, a huge show. And he was always extremely critical when it came to Bitcoin. But now he seems to have completely changed his mind. There's also a really wild clip that we're about to watch, which is currently going viral on the internet. And we've already had so many like that. Donald Trump was a critic before he became a supporter. Larry Fink was a critic before he became a supporter. Michael Saylor himself was a critic before he became a supporter. Feel free to let me know in the comments whether you understood Bitcoin right away or if you were skeptical at first. By the way, make sure to subscribe to the channel if you haven't already, so we can share these videos with every knucklehead out there. And the YouTube algorithm knows these videos are relevant. Now let's watch 2 clips. First up is Dave Ramsey, who several years ago, actually many years ago, was really talking down Bitcoin. And then we'll watch the clip where he suddenly changed his mind. And that's honestly fascinating.
Now I got a whole other group of goobers after me. That's these Bitcoin goobs. But now these are web geeks, and so they're all alive on social media and gone bananas. And so, like, I'm the enemy of the world because, Dave, I thought you liked the free market. You'd like Bitcoin. I hope it works. It may work. I don't think it's going to. And it looks like it's failing as we speak, but it may work. In 10 years, it may have stabilized. In the meantime, I'm going to tell 8 million people every day that Bitcoin is Bitcoin, and it's the equivalent of the Iraqi dinar of the web. And I'm going to keep saying it because I'm not putting money in it personally, because it's an unstable currency that is regulated by no one and has no track record. And there's not even a physical item. At least with carpet thread, you'd have.
So this is honestly one of the harshest rants about Bitcoin you could possibly make. So he's comparing it here to the Iraqi dinar, saying that it's basically just some web geeks going crazy over it, and that there's nothing behind it. No government, no state. It's not stable. He's comparing it to really strange things, making some pretty absurd comparisons. At this point, he's honestly just making it look ridiculous. And we see this over and over again. That Bitcoin gets compared to all sorts of things. Then he also brings up the comparison that, well, it's not something physical. That comes up a lot too. Bitcoin isn't physical. You can't touch it like gold or something. So, of course, that must mean it's automatically really, really bad. And I just found that really, really confusing. And we just know that. Dave Ramsey is kind of an old school investor. Yeah, he just has these classic. I'm not exactly sure what all he does, but I can imagine it's things like ETFs and so on that he recommends. And he actually does have some good financial advice, like really helping people get out of debt, telling them, hey guys, you just have to check your expenses. You can't spend more than you earn, and so on. He really does give some cool tips. You have to give him credit for that. But when it comes to Bitcoin, like so many others, he just completely, I would say, lost control. And that's one side of it, and that was a few years ago. I don't know how old that clip is. And now, check out what was just aired here, or I think it was broadcast yesterday, on the Dave Ramsey Show, how suddenly the Dave Ramsey Show is reporting on Bitcoin. And you have to say, this is really a relevant show that, I would say, influences a lot of people. And of course, many people believe what is said there.
I would say Bitcoin is here. I'm not saying Bitcoin can't fall. I'm not saying I disagree with anything you said. In fact, I agree with everything. I would say to somebody, yeah, if you want to invest in Bitcoin, I would treat it just like we tell people to go sit down with a SmartVestor Pro and learn about the strategies so that you understand what you're doing. But I agree with you that it should be a part of a diversified strategy, not all eggs in that basket. I agree with that. I would say Bitcoin is here.
And that's just really, really wild. Here, they're actively saying that Bitcoin belongs in a diversified portfolio, meaning a portfolio that's spread out. He's saying not to put all your eggs in one basket, and it's simply now a recognized asset class. And you can really see how the Overton window is shifting here, or in other words, how the general opinion about Bitcoin is changing. And of course, it's also a matter of education. I mean, they've probably taken the time to really look into it. Now, back then, they probably just didn't have the knowledge or the know-how. I don't really want to blame people for it, at least not entirely, because honestly, it's understandable. It's something new. It's hard for a lot of people to grasp, so naturally they're a bit skeptical at first. And now he's just saying, okay, it's simply a recognized asset class. You can use it, just like gold or like stocks, ETFs or whatever. There's no need to be afraid of it anymore. And I think that's actually a really big trigger when more and more people start to admit to themselves, hey, maybe I made a mistake. I mean, they're not really admitting it. They're just saying, well, now it's just standard. That's how it always is. It's just like with the iPhone or something. There were critics who bashed it for years. And then suddenly they make a pivot and say, now it's actually good. But of course, they still don't admit that they ever made a mistake. But now that suddenly everyone is doing it, and because it's trendy and hip and all that, nobody questions it anymore. And you can just kind of slide along with the mainstream opinion. And Bitcoin is just becoming more and more mainstream. I mean, it's not totally mainstream yet, but we're definitely moving more and more in that direction. But there was also something else, something really huge that happened here. Senator Cynthia Lummis just spoke about making Bitcoin companies in the USA tax exempt, and that was a very interesting proposal. Because of course that would mean, for example, that companies like Strategies, 21 Capitals, and so on, would also get preferential treatment. I mean, you can definitely see that as a very, very positive development here. And then I saw something really interesting on the block trainer. A portfolio made up of 97% cash and only 3% Bitcoin would have generated an inflation-adjusted return of 20% since 2020. On the other hand, if you had only held cash, you would have suffered a loss in value of about 19%. That's the crazy thing about it. I think if you go back the last 16 years, if you held 98% cash and 2% Bitcoin, you were pretty much always cruising. Maybe now it's with the 97%, but that was actually the original idea. Then we were ahead compared to the S&P 500. That's exactly how it was. And those are, of course, really strong arguments. Because if you say, for example, that you can't handle the volatility, then you just go 97 or 98% into cash.